And with that being said, let's go ahead and begin. So we're going to start today by talking about the youth counterculture in the 1960s. So again, Zoom, if you can't hear me, I need you to tell me. So what's counterculture? Just as a concept. What does that mean?
Against the norm.
Against the norm, right? Counterculture goes against the norm. So we're going to talk about counterculture in the 60s. That means hippies. That means anti-war. Right? That means all that fun stuff. So, what? Mr. Schaefer. All right. So, let's get into it. That first key point, pretty straightforward, right? Although there's an anti-communist foreign policy that is very popular with people, right? Very few people in the U.S. are pro-communism. There is still arguments being made on both sides. Some people are going to be for it, some people are going to be against it, especially among young people. These arguments are going to be tense. These arguments will get violent. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
So, I hate hippies. That's funny. All right, so we're going to move forward from the first key point. Like I said, this is going to go a little bit quicker than normal. But if I do ask a question, feel free to answer it in chat. That would also be very helpful. So, second key point. We're doing both key points together, then we're going to get into the good stuff. Some groups on the left reject liberal policies. No liberal policies. They're against them because even in the 60s, when you were a liberal, you were still very anti-what? Communist. You're anti-communist, right? And so they felt political leaders weren't doing enough to transform things at home, right? They wanted the status quo in the economy to change. They wanted it to be different. They wanted moral policy changes to be pursued. Okay, so let's move on. Everyone not working. It's not working. Cool. This is the fun you get here. So there is a lot of information on this slide, but it is about public opinion. So basically, there's two sides to it. Who would have thought, right? You're going to have a lot of young people fighting over, do I support the war, do I not support the war? Am I pro-communism, anti-communism? Things like that. And you're going to get two college groups to come out of it. Why are college students arguing about this stuff the most?
Because
What do you think?
they're the future and they don't want to go to war.
They're the future and they don't want to go to war. Who gets drafted?
The young ones.
Young people, right? College-age people. If you're in college, the second you graduate college, where are you going?
The war.
The war. Which war?
Second one.
No.
That's Vietnam.
The Vietnam. You're going to the Nam, right? So young people have an interest in this stuff, especially the ones that don't want to go to war. Does that make sense? So you have two groups. Some of these groups are still around, like this one is the YAF, Young Americans for Freedom. They're a conservative group from universities, right? Young conservative people. 10-year-old cohort. Yeah, so in Vietnam, one thing to point out is most of the people fighting Vietnam are 18, 19, 20. It's not like World War II where they're like in their mid-20s and everybody kind of got up to go fight. This is people getting drafted. They're 18, 19, 20. Fresh out of high school, most of them. Very young thing. So the YAF, Young Americans for Freedom, they're supporting America's involvement in Vietnam because they support stopping the spread of communism.
Of course, the conservatives.
They're a conservative group. Now, the liberal group is called Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. And they wrote this thing called the Port Huron Statement. And they were stressing the importance of a participatory democracy. What does that mean, participatory democracy? What am I talking about?
You can be included in the democracy.
They said yes, but what does that mean? Like when I say participatory, what am I saying? Who gets to participate?
Everyone.
Huh?
Everyone.
Everyone, right? All the people. That's what they're striving for. Now, think about what we talked about yesterday, right? We talked about civil rights and stuff. In the 60s, just being the 60s, is everybody participating? Not freely, right? There's a lot of hurdles you got to jump through. There's a lot of people that have to be sometimes literally fighting, right, to get people to vote. So that's what they're for. They also want direct government action in what part, do you think? What do they want the government to do or fix? Think about what the key points said.
The
Check what the key point said. What do you think they want the government to do? Zoom chat. They want the government to directly interfere, something that affects us at home. Maybe starts with a P. Nope. Nope. Come on now. Starts with an O. Well, P and then an O. I know, right? That didn't help. POV. Poverty. How are you going to fix poverty? Government, do something about it. Does that make sense? Point of view. Yeah, it's not point of view. Does not mean point of view. So that's what they want. They also think that stopping the spread of global communism doesn't matter. Why? It doesn't affect them at home, right? It shouldn't be their main goal. Hey, there's people in poverty over here. Why are you worried about communism in Vietnam? Doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Doesn't make any sense. Questions? So, protect. They kind of are, right? Now let's talk about the Kent State Massacre. Again, massacre tends to be a propaganda term a lot of people like to use. Some people call this the Kent State shooting. I think I saw Kent State murders for one particularly, pointed statement. Basically, what happens here is there are students that have been protesting at Kent State University for a number of days. They're protesting Nixon's escalation of the war. What do you do when you escalate a war? What are you doing to it?
You're sending more people.
Sending more people, right? Making the war bigger, making the war bigger. Good. Okay. So, during these protests, though, you'll get vandalism and you'll get looted. So what's happening to public property at the university? Being destroyed, right? Now, we don't know who vandalized, we don't know who looted, right? Not all protesters are looters, not all looters aren't protesters, right? It's somewhere in the middle, who knows? But in response, the National Guard came in, right? That's the military. And they were trying to disperse the crowd, right? Trying to get rid of the crowd. The crowd started throwing rocks at the National Guard's members. The National Guard members, one of them opened fire, and a few more did afterwards. We don't know who, we don't know why. What is this starting to sound a lot like? Which massacre? The Boston Massacre, right? This is very similar to that. Because it is. It's kind of the same thing, right? It's kind of not even a massacre, although it's a little worse than the Boston one. 4 students died and 10 were wounded. It's a little worse, and there's photos of this one, right? So you see crying students, dead friends. But this is a major event. This is a major protest, and it got violent fast. They opened fire. No, that is not why they opened fire. It was not particularly swag, as they say. So, but that is the Kent State Massacre, right? A lot like the Boston Massacre, only instead of the British, it's the National Guard. Questions on that? So why are these people protesting again?
They don't want to go to war.
Which war?
Vietnam.
They don't want to go to Vietnam, right? And young people have a direct interest in Vietnam. Not violent, as sometimes protests do. So our third and final key point for this topic. We're covering 2 topics today. That's how we're going to do it today. So young people participated in a counterculture in the 1960s. They rejected social, economic, and political views of their parents' generation, which were which generation? What was the name for their parents' generation? The baby boomers, right? So they're rejecting those baby boomer ideas, and they're trying to bring a more informal part of society into informality into culture. So think about baby boomers. Were they formal?
Nope.
No?
No.
You sure?
I think so.
Think about a baby boomer. Think about like Frank Sinatra.
Oh, he's a baby boomer?
Yeah, he's like the person people the boomers like.
Oh.
Think about like picture a 50s person going to work. Right? Picture the head of the household in the 50s going to work. How's he dressed?
Dapper.
Dapper. What's he wearing? He's wearing a suit and tie, right? It looks like you're just walking down the hallway. That's very professional, right? That's professional. That's saying something. That's very formal. So when I say you're informal, you look more like me walking down the hallway, right? You're wearing jeans, wearing paint-stained shoes. You're just kind of doing your thing, right? The biggest push in 60s counterculture is swapping that formal with informal. You see it in the art. You see it in the writing. You see it in how people are dressed and walking around, hippies. You see it, you hear it in the music. You can hear the difference between like Charlie Be Good when we talked about the 50s last time and how it's very polished, and then like Jimi Hendrix and how chaotic it sounds. And we're gonna play some Jimi Hendrix at the end here. So let's talk about some of this. Let's talk about the hippie. So the main like part of counterculture and what it is like who embodied it most were the hippies. Yes, so new. They had rebellious styles about them. Their clothes, they dressed kind of raggedy, informal. They didn't care. They're like whatever. They also really like drugs. No, like I'm not kidding. Like they love drugs.
As they should.
Experimental drug use was a big part of the hippie movement. Let's just try this stuff. Let's see what happens. They lived in the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. They gathered around in these communal living conditions and literally just hung out and tried drugs all day. Some say nice, I say, not so great. It's concept. You should. That's funny. Yeah, hippies aren't great. But again, their community, they're like communal. Basically, they walked around and they were hobos for a little while, living in this little place. We're living communal, man. That really means is they're being homeless. They're just kind of loitering places. Huh? Tree huggers. We're talking about the tree huggers in a bit. This is more like.
They're a different breed.
This is more like, I don't want to do what you want me to do, man. Like that. Like, that's my bad hippie impression, but it kind of stands. Yeah, man. Remember, yesterday when we talked about sexual revolution, it's also a part of counterculture. It's all within the same thing, right? And I can't stress enough, hippies like to dress weird and slacker-like, and they really like drugs. They also don't shower. They also don't have drugs.
That natural musk.
Oh!
Everyone loves the natural.
I don't think anybody loves the natural musk. I don't think that's a thing people enjoy.
If hippies got the same revolution going, I think somebody like
For the record, I want you to know something. Now the whole world will know that you said natural musk on the internet.
Everyone, I said weird.
Oh, don't tell me about it. Okay, so let's talk about Woodstock. So the hippie movement is informal. What's the hippie movement?
Informal.
What's the hippie movement?
Informal.
Informal. It's counter to the proper holdings of their parents' generation. No suits. That's the basic. That's an easy way to look at it. You can hear it in their music. Think like how Frank Sinatra. Have you guys heard Frank Sinatra?
Yeah, flying to the moon.
Yeah, like fly me to the moon. Like he's very proper in how he sings, right? Versus like Bob Dylan, who is not as proper, right? Not as pretty sounding. Still sounds awesome.
It sounds pretty.
Not as like formal, but like before the point is that it's informal.
Yeah.
Right? Like it can sound good. It is good.
Yeah.
But it's informal. Now, the biggest height of this stuff is the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969. It's famous to this day, right? There's movies about it, there's books about it. It's this crazy festival that was days long. And basically, it's a concert with all the things counterculturists love: drugs, music, free waving lifestyles. You can't see it here in the classroom. You guys might be able to see it on the Zoom a little better. But the crowd is like this massive crowd in this middle of this field. Yeah, you guys might be able to see it on the paper a little bit. But it's bigger than Burn. Well, the iconic Jimi Hendrix is in there. You're right. So, sorry, I'm reading the chat. The chat's making me chuckle. Anyways, the thing with like Burning Man and modern stuff is those are planned, right?
Yeah.
This wasn't planned. It's also the 60s when there's no internet. And you can't just text everybody, hey, let's go to this farm and have a concert. This wasn't expected to get that big, and it just kept going. And these musicians just kept showing up. And Jimi Hendrix is the last one to perform. He closes the show out. And the biggest thing you got to know about counterculture is that it's basically excess. It's a big lifestyle of excess. Not in the sense that I have 30 cars and 50 houses, not that type of excess. But excess in that when you were a hippie, like you were a hippie. You know what I mean? Like there was no middle ground. You weren't like, well, I'm a hippie on the weekends and then during the week I go to work and have a house and said, no, you were in it. Like remember yesterday's slides, I had like the lady with the radishes and I was like, this will make sense tomorrow. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
I might have said it on Zoom and not in person. But there was like a lady picking radishes like in the middle of the street. Like that's what you did. You foraged and you live out of a car or you lived in the middle of nowhere and like you were full on like hippie movement. And you guys have seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. All the Mansonites walking around, those are hippies. Yeah, it is a lifestyle. Fair enough, Roman. You are carrying the chat on your back. Well, I got a couple of private messages as well. Fair enough, though. Fair enough. I do appreciate all that. I'll appreciate all the anti-hippie rhetoric, though. That always makes me chuckle. Okay, so here's what I want to do now. I'm going to play a Jimi Hendrix song just so you guys get an idea of what the sound of counterculture is. And try to think back on when we played like Johnny B. Good and Elvis and you heard how clean and crisp all that sounds versus how kind of chaotic Jimi Hendrix sounds. Right? This is a song y'all have probably heard already, but it's still good to play again. So I got to stop the share really quick. I got to share again with sound. There we go. So that's counterculture and pop culture stuff. Now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the environment a little bit. These are two kind of short topics and lessons that we're going to just glue together. Your exit ticket, we'll talk about at the end. It's not that big of an exit ticket. It's actually fairly straightforward. But let's talk about the environment now. Let's change gears. Yeah, we're going to save the earth. Yeah. So you don't have to beat any more hippies up because we're going to talk about saving the planet. And we're going to talk about nuclear power and oil. That's always fun.
People save the planet already.
Different type of hippie, though. So let's talk about the first key point. Ideological, military, and economic concerns will shape the United States' involvement in the Middle East. Oh boy, the Middle East is a big fat mess, and we're going to get involved. And that kind of starts here in the 70s and 80s. There will be a severe oil crisis in the United States in the mid-70s, and it will only get worse.
Oh, no.
Yes, no, that's where gas comes from and stuff. So,
That's why you invade.
oil is the major resource across the world post-1930, right? It's been a big deal since World War II. It continues to be a big deal now. Much of the world's oil, though, comes from the Middle East. Specific set of countries within the Middle East, right? And by the time you get to the 60s and 70s, the U.S. and the Middle East not quite too friendly. Do you guys know why they're not quite too friendly?
Because we kept invading.
No, this is before we invaded.
Oh. Trades?
Because the U.S. supported and helped create the nation of Israel in 1948. Now, we're not going to get too into this. This is a big geopolitical topic. But basically, you got to know Israel, country for Jewish people, post-World War II, was created. The U.S. is a big supporter of that. The U.S. helped get that done. The U.S. also will be the biggest, strongest ally. That's our biggest ally in the Middle East, is Israel. So a bunch of Arab countries in the Middle East don't want, actually most of them don't want the nation of Israel to be a thing, but it is. And when they said, hey, America, don't do that, we're like, no, we're going to do it. And so that's where that tension comes from, before we even invade. So that's the tail of the tape, so to speak, in Israel. So let's talk about OPEC. In 1973, the U.S. supported Israel was going to cost them big. The oil-holding Middle Eastern countries will form OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC will then dramatically reduce their oil exports to the United States. They just stop sending most of the oil that they were sending before. And then whatever they do send, they also jack up the price, like something fierce, which leads to an oil shortage, mass oil shortages in the United States. Gasoline gone. Limits, gas stations just out of business forever because they don't have gas anymore. Like, it was a devastating time in the 70s and 80s. Why is it so devastating to run out of oil?
Yeah.
What? Why? Why is it so devastating to run out of oil in the U.S.? Or anywhere?
Because you need it.
For what?
Vehicles,
You need it for cars, you need it for machines, right? And think about America's culture, right? Are we a car culture?
Probably.
Do we have a lot of cars?
Yeah,
Do most people need a car to get to work or to get places? Yeah, right? That's not necessarily the case everywhere, but it most certainly is the case in the United States. And like the flip of a light switch, that oil supply is cut off. And it's going to be devastating. And it takes years to kind of get us back up to where it is now. Plus some invasions and all that good stuff. So oil shortages kind of freak everybody out. And the U.S. tries to find alternate energy sources, right? Now in the 70s, there is no solar, there's barely any solar now, right? Electricity, and you need to power that stuff somehow. One of those options is nuclear power. Uranium, which powers the nuclear power plants, is everywhere, and it's very cheap. Also, nuclear power reactors produce zero O2 emissions. They do not pollute the environment the way oil does, or the way coal does, or the way anything else that you got to burn does. So they're very clean. But nuclear reactors have meltdowns, and they can pour radioactive waste everywhere if they're not properly maintained, right? And that's kind of the biggest downside. It could, yes, they don't hurt the environment like slowly long term, right? Like cancer does, like oil. But they can, in the snap of a finger, devastate the environment.
Chernobyl.
Yes, Chernobyl is a good example. We're going to talk about that in a second. Yep, Chernobyl, exactly. Because yeah, big V, exactly. We do burn oil like nobody's business. And now, speaking of Chernobyl, so we had our own mini Chernobyl, kind of, in something called the 3 Mile Island incident. This was in 1979. There was a partial, not a full. Chernobyl was like everything blew up. This is a partial meltdown with one of the reactors, and it spilled a ton of toxic waste everywhere. And it put the entire, this was a very populated area, everybody was in danger, but to the government's credit, they were very quick to clean everything up. And this is disputed, but for the most part, we do not know of any damage that was done permanently to the environment. So it was a big disaster, everybody freaked out, but nothing bad really happened. Does that make sense? That was our mini almost Chernobyl. And then of course Chernobyl, which you guys probably do know about, which the Soviet Union had this huge accident and everything was devastated, right? Nothing lives there. So those cons tended to scare people, right? People are a little scared of nuclear power because they're worried, oh, what if we blow everything up? That's a genuine concern. So let's talk about our second key point. Look at that, we're almost done. Right? Environmental problems and accidents lead to a growing environmental movement that aims to use legislative and public efforts to combat pollution, protect natural resources, and the federal government will establish new programs and regulations to help this along. So we finally realized around the 70s, oh my God, we keep doing this, we're going to blow up the planet, and we live there. That's not good. We live here. We shouldn't ruin it. That make sense? All right. So during this era, the environmental movement starts. You got Rachel Carlson, wrote a book called The Silent Spring. And this book showed people that, hey, every day without even realizing it, we're kind of ruining the planet. One of the big things she was against was DDT pesticides, which like kill everything, not just bugs. That's why nowadays you find stuff that like, it's a pesticide, but it's supposed to be good for everything. Like once it dries, it doesn't hurt anything else. DDT pesticides, like if your dog accidentally walks over it and like licks it, dead. Like that stuff's devastating. I'm not a big ag person, but that's my understanding of them. And I could be generalizing a little bit, but DDT are bad. It's bad for the environment. If it gets in the water, it could pollute the water stream. Like it's bad for the environment. And they were just spraying that stuff everywhere, by the way, in the 70s and 60s and 50s. Also, Earth Day gets established. Yay, Earth Day! Yeah, planetary Earth Day! Woo! And those all make people more environmentally conscious. People realize, hey, environment should protect it. Now, in 1970, the EPA was established, and they were there to manage pollution control, pesticides, and abuse from businesses that polluted, right? So, like if you had a factory and it polluted, the EPA's job was to make sure you didn't pollute too much. In 1969, the Cahokia River in Ohio caught fire because of how heavily polluted it was. The river was so polluted, the water caught fire. This isn't like an oil spill where there's oil at the top and the oil caught fire. No, the river caught fire because it was that polluted. Factory waste and stuff. Also, it supposedly caught fire like 14 times. So it wasn't just one fire. The river caught fire like 14 times. Okay, so the Clean Air Act was passed in 1963. This aimed to control air pollution on a national scale. Those responsibilities were eventually absorbed by the EPA, right? Which is, again, there to protect the environment. And environmental movements help prevent nuclear energy from taking hold because people are scared of another Chernobyl. The 3 Mile Island incident makes things also people like, hey, it can happen here, it happened there, it can happen here, right? And people are so terrified of meltdowns that they don't want to mess with nuclear. So nuclear power is still not a viable option, mainly because of the efforts of environmentalists. I don't know too much about it to know if it is, but you'll hear people nowadays saying, why don't we go nuclear? And it's like, Chernobyl, kind of why. But, like I said, I'm no expert on that stuff. Okay, so with that being said, we are done with content. I know that was quick, Zoom, but we went through 2 topics. Hopefully, it made sense to everybody. If there are any questions, I will field them right now. And if there are no questions, then what we're going to do is, for your exit ticket, is pretty straightforward. There is no new exit ticket today. What I want you to do is open up Google Classroom and make sure you submitted yesterday's exit ticket. If you have done that, you are done. That is my, hey, we took a test today, I don't want to make y'all work too hard thing, right? So if you already did yesterday's, you're good. You're done. If you haven't done yesterday's, do it right now. You literally have like 25 minutes to do it. So if you haven't done yesterday's, do it now. If you're done with yesterday's, you're done. Now, if you just got here, which some people did, this video will be uploaded a little later. If the sound quality is bad, I need you guys to reach out and tell me so I can re-upload a cleaner reading of me doing it. But this was interesting. I don't know if we'll do this again. I kind of liked it. I kind of didn't like. Blessed is a strong term, but that's just my kind of like, y'all take a test. We still have to learn some content. I know I blasted through it quickly, but that's why the slides are up posted already. So with that being said, guys,